Hey, team players, welcome to another conversation. In fact, our final conversation from ESPN's initial June ranking for their top 20 players of a PPR format. This is round 20. And the reason to pay attention to what local football flavor is we make winners. Long story short, you can follow us throughout the season for the week-to-week changes. And we don't just say, hey, be with this guy. It's league cheerleaders. We tell you when people aren't draftable and not worth having. And as always, we're going to conclude this episode as well with our total rankings of the 20th round here. And in the 20th round, there's actually surprisingly some players that I would have taken earlier and some guys that are my sleepers that got identified here. And throughout this entire process, I have said the Raiders are undraftable as a team, and they are. You look at their defense, they have one player, his name's Crosby. With Jimmy Garoppolo now being their quarterback, if he's even their starting quarterback week one due to injury, it has completely violated the way that team has been built. That team is built to be a vertical passing team, and Jimmy Garoppolo is not capable of doing that. When they bring in Jacoby Myers, and that's why Adams wants out, they're built to be vertical. They aren't going to be vertical. They're going to be shallow, dink, and dunk. And the one player, and remember, this is for PPR, not for standard, but for PPR, that's going to benefit from this change is Hunter Renfro. Hunter Renfro is one of the best receivers in its shoebox to be able to get in and out of his breaks and get open. Mm-hmm. And that is the kind of game that Jimmy G plays. He is not the most talented receiver on that team, not the most talented receiver on that team by far. But for fantasy value, for fantasy overall perhaps, he might be the best Raider, especially after Adams gets moved. So I love that situation with Renfro. And Bob, let's kick it over to you.
So I have actually Renfro ranked in the same vein as Zay Flowers, Tyler Boyd.
I've had that.
Darnell Mooney. They're all Hunter Renfro. His injury sidetracked him last year on the season. That's 100% certain. But when he was on the field with Carr the previous season, there were games where you're just like, "What? Where did he come from? How did this
line up with Carr?
How did this even happen?" And so you look and you say, "Okay, Jimmy Garoppolo is now their quarterback. Jimmy Garoppolo isn't able to move it that far down the field. How are they going to do that? Well, they're going to move the ball down the field with Jacobs. They're going to move the ball down the field with Renfro." And I think there's a good opportunity here that Renfro could end this season with 6 to 7 touchdowns and probably 800 yards receiving. That is not out of the realm of possibility for Hunter Renfro. And for him to be listed as slow, I think he's just listed as slow based off of injury because projections, as you look at where he might be tiered at in terms of wide receivers, I would rather have him than Elijah Moore. I would rather have him than Darnell Mooney. I would rather have him than Alan Lazard. I would rather have him than Rashad Bateman, and I would probably even rather have him than Kadarius Toney, which is a lot of these wide receivers that we've already gone through. Mm-hmm. Speaking of another wide receiver that is a really interesting piece of the puzzle here in Minnesota is KJ Osborne. Mm-hmm. KJ Osborne is basically the third option on the team now. You went from Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen and Hawkinson to Justin Jefferson, Hawkinson, and KJ Osborne.
Well, do you think he's in front of Addison or behind him?
I think that Addison's going to take some time to get acclimated to Kirk Cousins. And Addison, to me, as we talked about, he is a high upside potential here. And you've said, I don't really like drafting rookie wide receivers, and there's something to say about that. But when KJ Osborne was playing last year, there was a lot of opportunities for him to just show us what he's made out of. And I think that when you look at the Vikings situation, there's going to be a lot of mouths to feed in Minnesota. And when you look at he's an interesting player for me because I think that he's in a similar situation as some of the other guys that we've talked about before.
See, to me, he's just like Tyler Boyd. If one of the studs above him go down, he will produce. But as soon as they're back, he's back to disappearing. He's a handcuff for receivers.
I think that's a fair assumption to make. I'm not as we get down to the lower ends of the draft here, he's a guy that has a low upside, but and his floor.
He's situational upside. Like he's like a tree. If one of the big dogs above him break, he can shoot to the sun, but he ain't breaking through them.
So that's the whole thing with KJ Osborne. And Marquise Valdes-Scantling is so inconsistent that it's just super scary.
I feel like we're always waiting for Valdez to turn on.
We always want him to be successful, but the issue is that I think that we just have to know that he's inconsistent. And if I start him during a bye week, or I want to start him on a flex, there's a good chance that I get 0. There's a good chance I get 25. So I mean, it's a fair assumption to make out of the 3 of them. I mean, there are a lot of wide receivers that we did not talk about in our top in the top 200 of ESPN so far, and Marquise Valdes-Scantling ranks as like the 80th best wide receiver on Fantasy Pros, and so he's ranked right near Hardman. And so you're looking at it and you're saying, well, 80 wide receivers are going to go in most fantasy drafts that are 12-team leagues. 10-team leagues, maybe you're going to get, maybe 70 or like 75, maybe a little bit less than that, because typically speaking, in a 10-team league, you might have 2 starting wide receivers and a flex. Mm-hmm. And so at maximum, you're going to get the top 30. If it goes to 3 wide receivers and then you can figure out, all of your flexes there, you might get the top 70 wide receivers taken. So you're not even thinking about some of these guys, but Hunter Renfro is one of those guys you should think about. I think KJ Osborne is another one of those guys that's worth thinking about as well. As we look at the rest of these, I'm really curious about McKinnon. I'm really curious about Gus Edwards' situation. There are 2 situations that, if they slot in correctly, they could put up some points for you. And I think that that's really interesting, but their floor Edwards'
floor is never getting on the field.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's an interesting situation.
Yeah, and I want to spend a minute here wrapping up this episode here and diving deeper into the 2 quarterbacks from the fantasy perspective here. So Stroud, anyone who's watched me talk about an Ohio State quarterback, or Stroud in particular, he's going to be in the same line as Fields. He's not going to be athletic. He's going to run for his life. And at the end of the day, the receiving core in Houston isn't that good. So when we look at it and go, you get another running back by picking him, he's completely streamable. But I also understand it's the last round. Let me take someone who's got an upside. So Stroud is the kind of guy who could have upside as he's running for his life if he breaks them. I want Justin Fields.
I want to check on this because Jerick McKinnon is not a free agent. He signed back with Kansas City, and so.
Okay, so that's updated.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I didn't like Clyde Edwards-Helaire and I didn't understand why he was ranked above Jerick McKinnon is because Jerick McKinnon saw more opportunities in the pass game than anybody else. It felt like on the Kansas City Chiefs outside of Kelsey. So in my mind here, the Kansas City Chiefs are so unique because I think there's a history of them outside of Tyreek Hill not really like effectively utilizing specific. I mean, I remember Dwayne Bowe. You talk about Tyreek Hill, Hardman, Scott. I mean, they've had lots of players on their team, and you're thinking it's like, wow, like Jerick McKinnon ended up with a lot of touchdowns last year, a lot of receptions last year coming out of the backfield. And I think that could happen again this year, even though Pacheco, it seems like a dog. If I'm taking any 2 players from this list of players, it's going to be Renfro and McKinnon. And if I'm doing that, I'm probably doing that a couple rounds earlier because they're players that I would want to have on my team because I think their situations are such that I think that they're going to be able to slot in really easily into a bye week slot and be like, okay, I can rely on you for at least 7 points, and you're exponentially, you could get 35.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's true. So, but to finish my point here on Love, I think that Love is possibly the biggest slept super weapon that's sitting out there. I think the Packers are winning their division in a way that people are not going to see coming, and I think Love's driving that bus. People are treating Love like he's a rookie. He's not. He's the reason they got rid of a Hall of Fame quarterback. At the end of the day, that's the fundamental on-the-field answer. And LaFleur is an absolute great coach. Now, do I think that he's going to be putting up 40-plus touchdown passes? No. But I don't think he's going to do mistakes. I don't think that he's going to blow things up. And I think that at the end of the day, Love is going to be someone that, again, if you're looking at a 2-quarterback league and you don't want to spend the resources on your second quarterback, realizing that the whole back end is basically the same, Love to me is one of these diamonds in the rough because I'd rather have him than a Stroud. Because Stroud, you're basically just hoping he runs for a touchdown before he throws an interception. Love makes connections, and he made Watson amazing those few times he was in the field. I think Love, like I said, I think Green Bay is winning that division, and I think it's all going to be because of Love, because God knows it's not their first-round defense. So when I look at this, there's a lot of easy passes in Green Bay. With Aaron Jones, he does so much productive coming out of the backfield, similar to an Eckler style, and they have a very good offense in Green Bay, and I think Love is going to be a beneficiary of this. And of all the quarterbacks we talked about, in really the last 6 rounds, with the exception of Derek Carr, I have Love above all of them. And it's not even close.
That's
so
cool.
I again, and I also think Derek Carr has a chance of outside fighting for league MVP this year because of the situation he's in. You have to recognize that Love is the reason they were okay with getting rid of Rodgers. And I am putting this because I do believe it's going to be true and the two are connected. I think Love's going to have a better fantasy year than Rodgers this year, playing with all of the toys that Rodgers had.
I mean, speaking of Aaron Rodgers, I think that my favorite defense is sitting right in this round. I am really high on the New York Jets defense.
Fair.
I really think they're a great team. They do have a really difficult schedule this year. But I think they also give you the opportunity for turnovers. And if you're drafting a defense in this round, and you probably are going to be drafting a defense in this round with your other league mates, it just makes sense to take the Jets. And I think the Jets are actually not going to be available to you. I think the Jets are probably going to be the 3rd or 4th defense taken. Possibly in New York leagues, they're definitely going to be the first one taken.
Well, there's name recognition with the Jets defense now.
Yeah, so you've got to really, if you want them, I think you're going to have to take them higher than you do want them to do. I don't understand why the Rams are ranked.
Rams are an undraftable team.
That does not make any sense to me. And I do think that the Broncos are going to do better. So I think Brandon McManus by association will do better. But again, there are other kickers that I like. One of them being Koo. So if we were to rank these players right now, so my rankings are Hunter Renfro is my number 1 out of this group. Jerick McKinnon is my number 2. I think they provide to you the best opportunities to get points in the PPR format. I think that's really important. These two are very valuable to PPR. I think they're not going to go in this round. I think they're going to go 5 rounds ahead, maybe even 6 rounds ahead because they're just that valuable. Next up is the Jets defense. I think the Jets defense could end up being the number 1 defense in fantasy this year. In New York leagues, you're not going to be drafting them as in this round. In most leagues, you're not going to be drafting them in this round. I think they're going to go ahead of the Bills. I think they're going to go ahead of the Broncos. I think they're just that good. Then I have Marquise Valdes-Scantling. Marquise Valdes-Scantling is in an interesting situation. That wide receiver situation is in flux. The only certainty that we know of is Kelsey, followed by McKinnon potentially, and then the rest is kind of up for grabs. He is inconsistent, so be very careful. You could be getting, when you slot him in, a 1-point week or a 20-point week, and I think that's very dangerous, but it's also what you want out of a player like that. KJ Osborne then sits in next. KJ Osborne is a great player for me. I liked what he showed last year. But his situation is like Tyler Boyd's situation. I think he should be ahead of Addison, to be honest with you. But I mean, that's just my opinion there. Then I would put Gus Edwards, I guess, as I don't really know why. It's just the Ravens running back situations have always been kind of interesting, unique. They've been hurting, but he is talented when he gets on the field. So I think that's really a really good thing to put in his favor. I'd put Love next for the reasons you said. I think Love is going to do good enough this year. I don't think he will end up in the top 10 of quarterbacks, but I think it's very reasonable to assume that Love could get top 20 when it comes to the end of the day, maybe even top 15. CJ Stroud, I think, is going to be outside the top 15 in terms of quarterback fantasy numbers. I don't like his situation. I don't like the Texans' offense. I'm just not sold on that at all. I'm staying away from CJ Stroud. But the last thing here is the Rams. How do you rank the Rams, who lost almost everything and have just kept Aaron Donald in the top 200 list of assets in fantasy football, ESPN? It just doesn't make any sense. Stop.
It does not. I'd have the Steelers defense a mile before the Rams. The Rams are going to end up in the bottom 20 defense, and possibly bottom 30 when it's all said and done. So for my rankings here, Renfro is number 1, and then would come Love, then McKinnon, then a hard line. And then would come at my 4th spot would be Osborne, because when he plays, assuming he also beats out Addison, there's a lot of ifs with Osborne, but when Osborne does produce, he produces very well. Following up there, my 5th spot would be Stroud, because if Stroud does break a couple off and runs, he will be valuable as a running quarterback. He will be useless as a passing quarterback, just like Fields and Lamar Jackson. And when we go to the next group here, it would be McManus, Scantling, and then I end up with Edwards and Rams, because I don't think either two of them are completely worth drafting at all. Quite frankly, I don't think Scantling is worth drafting either. And I think that's how it would be when it's all said and done. So team players, if you haven't already, click subscribe. That's how you become a team player. We will be doing a best ball league here. Click as we get closer to August. So leave your information here, either in the comments. You can find on our YouTube homepage, our email as well, and send us a message there. So until then, we'll see you as we get closer to kickoff.